This is not a video I ever wanted to make. I don't have heroes, I haven't for a very long time, as I found them to be the quickest path to disappointment. But there are still people for whom I hold a great deal of respect, and I'm not gonna lie, it still feels like a kick in the teeth when one of those people not only messes up, but more importantly, doubles down on everything. Especially when that thing has already hurt a lot of people. So whilst this may not be a video I ever wanted to make, it is a video I need to make since Tom Scott's response to Gilbert's bigotry has been appalling, to put things mildly. Though before we can delve deeper into that, I first need to give a content warning for the following topics: transphobia, anti-Semitism, homophobia, ableism, racism, misogyny, child sexual assault, and fascism. If you like our work and appreciate the research put into each video, please consider supporting the channel via Patreon. You can also support us by liking, commenting, and sharing our work on social media. Hi there, my name is Ethel Thurston, and today we'll be taking a look at Tom Scott's statement regarding Gilbert's history of transphobia, what he knew before publishing, and how he reacted to being called out, including how he antagonized his critics. We'll also take a look at how Tom Scott could have avoided all of this, a solution so simple that I dare say it leaves him no excuse for what happened. Now, I've already put out a video discussing Jill Bearup, not only going over how bad her transphobia was and how it related to the greater context of transphobia in the UK, but how it crossed over into homophobia, ableism, anti-Semitism, racism, and misogyny at various points. I also discuss the ways in which a number of Gilbert's arguments are reliant on the sexualization of minors, specifically trans boys and AFAB MB folk. Because that isn't an absolutely horrific thing to put myself through as a CSA survivor. Point is, I suggest watching that video before this one for greater context, as well as an understanding of why this isn't something we can simply ignore. Gilbert's bigotry wasn't the usage of a slur that one time or a single ignorant tweet. It was a sustained attack on trans people over multiple years, exploiting a smorgasbord of bigotry whilst also helping normalize fascism in the UK. Also, since I'll be referencing this quite a bit, anytime I say bigotry, just assume I'm talking about the transphobia, homophobia, ableism, anti-Semitism, racism, misogyny, and paedophilia collectively. Something I noticed whilst recording my last video is that it's quite a mouthful to list them individually each time, it stretches things out, and I think we've got the picture by now. And I know paedophilia isn't technically a form of bigotry, but Ms. Bearup was sexualizing minors as a means to promote said bigotry, so we'll include it. And with that out of the way, let's start with a quick timeline of events, take into consideration what we've seen and what Tom Scott tells us in his statement, starting of course with the facts that he wasn't aware of the issue before he started production. Tom Scott, as with many people, assumed that Jill Bearup was safe to work with. In his case specifically, he states that her presence on Standard, the production group primarily responsible for the Nebula streaming service, was a clear sign that she was safe due to said service hosting a number of trans people. That isn't the case, clearly, but it will come up later, so keep it in mind. So Mr. Scott and Ms. Bearup begin working together on a collaboration in which they would publish 2 videos about stunt fighting, one to Ms. Bearup's channel and one to Tom Scott's channel. They meet up, they record, they produce their pieces, and Tom Scott publishes a trailer for the whole thing. That's when Tom Scott was first alerted about Gilbert's history of transphobia. As his statement reads, quote, "When the trailer was published as part of a general update video, a couple of friends did give me a heads up, but also said the posts were years old and long deleted. I also had 4 emails from viewers, but they also included that the post had been deleted. And, as the video with the trailer included a call for ideas, those emails were part of a flood of literally thousands of messages that it took weeks to triage." End quote. Tom Scott was faced with a choice. According to him, he had 4 options, though he only thought of the 4th one after everything blew up. Before that, however, he thought he could only delete the video, publish a video with a note discussing what happened, or publish a video assuming the issue had been resolved and thus not mention anything. Later on, he realised he could ask Jill Bearup about her views. Tom Scott ultimately chose to publish his video on the 25th of December without any mention of the issue, resulting in an immediate response by trans people. We reached out, supplying him with references to what Jill Bearup had done, with the vast majority of trans people simply assuming he didn't know. Because nobody, and I can't stress this enough, nobody in the trans community wanted to believe that Tom Scott had chosen to promote a known bigot, especially now of all times. And we'll get to what I mean by that in a minute. I was actually made aware of the issue when a number of trans people began talking about Jill Bearup in the EOT Discord server, seeking and offering one another support. As coincidence, I'd made the decision to be in the server chat as much as possible during the period between Yule and New Year. COVID's still going on, a lot of people who follow me are marginalised, many have faced family rejection, and I didn't want anyone to feel alone during that period. That also meant I was made aware of what had happened immediately. The trans community who remembered Jill Bearup and what she'd done were clearly in distress, waiting with held breath to see how Tom Scott would respond. Again, nobody wanted to assume he was a bigot, but we also needed to ensure our future safety around his channel. Eventually, after 2 days of silence, Tom Scott addressed the problem on the 27th of December, publishing a statement titled "Fight Scene Video" to his website. Needless to say, there were a number of issues taken with said statement. Tom Scott trivialized the problem, spoke down to his critics, and failed to acknowledge who was harmed, thus failing to satisfy the people who had initially spoken out. Which is what prompted me to begin making my videos. First the Jill Bearup video, and now this one, bringing us to where we are now. As far as I'm aware, Tom Scott has not said anything further on the matter as of the time I'm recording this. Ah yes, the ever infamous words, "at the time I'm recording this." The very day I finished editing the raw footage and got ready to move on to the graphics, Tom Scott updated his post, stating that, quote, "After talking to friends and colleagues over the past couple of weeks, I've decided to take down the video. Thank you to everyone who reached out for your time and patience. The original post remains below for context." End quote. Sadly for everyone involved, this doesn't actually address the issues I'm about to bring up. As I state repeatedly throughout this video, the problem isn't Tom Scott's initial collaboration, it's the way he failed to act when warned about the issue, and later how he trivialized his trans critics, something he's not exactly apologizing for in his statement. In fact, the only thing that's really impacted by all of this is his updated title, but Tom Scott ultimately fails to acknowledge the nature of Jill Bearup's bigotry, leaving most trans folk oblivious to the facts that he's had them subscribe to the transphobic equivalent of an old naval mine washed up on an England beach. Will it go off? Nobody knows! Anyway, with that brought to your attention, back to the video. Now, the first thing that stuck out to me about Tom Scott's statement was the fact that he admits to having been warned about Jill Bearup's bigotry prior to publishing. Yes, I know he talks about being inundated with emails since he put out requests for ideas, but that's largely irrelevant when you've had multiple friends approach you to warn you about said thing independently. Just put yourself in Tom Scott's shoes for a second, including having access to his expertise. Imagine you just put out a trailer for a future video, only to have a couple of people who you know and trust approach you, warning you about the person you've collaborated with. Wouldn't that tip you off to the fact that whatever happened, it probably hasn't been resolved, at least not in everyone's mind? I mean, if it were a non-issue, why would they bother going out of their way to warn you? Doesn't the fact that they did kinda merit further consideration? And surely upon realizing that, you think to, I don't know, use the search option provided by every single email service to search for key terms like transphobia and trans alongside Jill Bearup? The point I'm trying to get at here is the fact that I find it rather strange that a number of Tom Scott's videos are about analysing data from surveys involving tens and even hundreds of thousands of people, yet a simple search feature seems to mystify him all of a sudden. Indeed, far from resolving things, his statement left people like myself feeling less secure around him. Contrary to what some people might like you to believe, the issue here isn't the fact that he didn't know when production began, it's what he chose to do once he had been alerted to the potential problem. If you handle heavy machinery and one of your warning lights came on and you chose to ignore it, not bothering to check things, any accident that happened as a result would be entirely your responsibility. Well, this was his warning light. Because as much as Tom Scott asks us to be considerate of the circumstances surrounding the video, relating to it being the holidays and him being a single person, we also need to keep in mind what is currently taking place regarding the trans community in the UK. Because yes, context is a two-way street. And as discussed in my Jill Bearup video, the trans community is under attack. It has been for years. Towards the end of 2020, 3,000 trans folk were stripped of vital access to medication, including HRT, overnight. Some of them were people who'd undergone gonadectomies and would suffer bone wastage and similar complications unless they received said supplements. Thankfully, the issue was resolved, but it was a terrifying time for trans people in the UK, including trans youth who were left adrift after years of waiting. And it was followed up almost immediately with the High Court of England and Wales declaring trans people second-class citizens, ruling that trans people under the age of 18 lacks the right to full medical consent. For context, the national standard for full medical autonomy is 16. It felt like the LGBT+ community had been dragged back in time to a point prior to the equalisation of the age of sexual consent. At the same time, trans people under the age of 16 were denied the provisions laid out under Gillick competence, a standard by which a person under the age of 16 can consent to a treatment so long as they can demonstrate a comprehensive understanding of the risks involved. Thankfully, we beat that back, getting the ruling overturned, but we're left wondering about the future. Whilst essential care for trans people is still technically legal in the UK, the current government has ensured that the waitlist to see a specialist on the NHS has only grown longer and longer. At current, the average waiting time for a first appointment with an NHS gender specialist is between 33 and 36 months, so 3 years. 3 years to see someone about life-saving treatment. And that's the average. Some people are waiting for more than 6 years for their first appointment, and that's a number that only continues to grow. But that's only the tip of the iceberg. Within the last few months, the BBC, a once beloved media powerhouse, launched an all-out attack on Stonewall, the largest LGBT+ advocacy group in Europe, forwarding it as part of some nefarious conspiracy, brainwashing British youth for doing its job. This, of course, fed right into the hands of the various anti-Semitic conspiracies that define gender-critical fascism, as discussed in the Jill Bearup video. The BBC then followed this up with an article presenting every trans woman as a sexual predator, using the exact same rhetoric as Jill Bearup, whilst also promoting a cis woman who was a self-confessed serial rapist as a voice speaking on behalf of victims of sexual violence. Editors at the BBC subsequently revealed that they knew about said confession before publishing said article. All of this has been incredibly public. We not only feel attacked, we also feel let down by the British media in general. So if there was ever a time to stop and think about your actions as a British media personality when multiple people warn you that the person you are working with has a history of transphobia, implying that said situation's resolution is ambiguous at best, any reasonable person would take the time to check things out rather than assume that it's all sorted. Tom Scott did not do any of that. Instead, he took the easy way out, leaving those of us in the trans community to try and pick up the pieces as usual. And it only gets worse from there. with Tom Scott implying that Jill Bearup still holds a number of her bigoted beliefs. As mentioned earlier, Tom Scott noted that he only realised he could approach Jill Bearup about her history of transphobia after he was called out for promoting her, going on to add that, quote, "So yesterday I did what I should have done earlier and explicitly asked Jill if those deleted posts do still reflect her views. Her reply is complicated." End quote. Now, considering the nature of everything we went over in my previous video, the extent of the bigotry on display, the phrase, "her reply is complicated," is a red flag. When you've been called out for presenting trans women as inherently dangerous, arguing autistic adults should be stripped of bodily autonomy, and presenting trans youth as the victims of a secret order that the people you surround yourself with routinely claim to be funded by the Jews, complicated isn't good enough. Jill Bearup failing to react with a clear and immediate denouncement of said ideas, considering her history of personally promoting them, tells me that she's still dangerous. It not only reveals that, at best, Ms. Bearup doesn't understand the extent of the harm she caused, it also tells me that there's nothing holding her back from changing her mind and promoting those views the moment it aligns with her self-interests. Not that she's actually left said beliefs behind, as elaborated on by Tom Scott. Quote, "In summary, no. Jill does not seem to hold all the views that people are ascribing to her, and I don't believe she holds views that justify taking down an already published video and disavowing her. But there are some things I definitely disagree with, and some things that are so far outside my sphere of knowledge that I would need to spend days or weeks researching before feeling even vaguely qualified to discuss them privately, let alone publicly." End quote. Emphasis on the phrase, "but there are some things I definitely disagree with." If Tom Scott had reason to believe that Jill Bearup had actually abandoned her beliefs, he'd just say that outright. I don't believe he'd hesitate for a moment to put everyone's mind at ease if he could, even if only to stop the criticism he was receiving. But he can't do that, since if Jill Bearup speaks out on the matter, the chances of some of her bigotry coming out are all too likely. So Tom Scott's much better off claiming that she doesn't hold all the views that people are ascribing to her, lessening the impact of what she's done, whilst also retaining the right to go, "Oh yeah, those are the beliefs I don't agree with," if she ever speaks out. Though Tom Scott doesn't frame it that way, instead he claims that he's being vague out of some bullshit sense of respect for the bigot. Quote, "I'm being very vague because trying to summarise would be inaccurate and unfair, and would also spark unhelpful endless debate. Talking or not talking publicly about her views is Jill's decision to make. I hope she does eventually, and I hope there's an apology involved, but I can't do that here and I can't do that for her." End quote. What Tom Scott's doing here is elevating Jill Bearup's privacy regarding her history of bigotry over the safety of the people she publicly targeted. And I don't just mean safety in the sense that if Jill Bearup lashes out again, every trans, gay, bisexual, autistic and Jewish person Tom Scott sent to her channel is now going to be caught up in the immediate blast. I mean it in the sense of security. One of the reasons crimes motivated by prejudice towards people belonging to a marginalised group are punished harsher than similar crimes not motivated by it is actually pretty simple. Hate crimes create an atmosphere of fear and tension for all members belonging to said marginalised group. It makes them less likely to go out and engage in day-to-day life, ergo, said crime is treated as one against an entire group of people. But that's not the only way a person can instill that sense of fear. The reason Kelly J. Keane Minchell put up her woman, adult human female, and I Heart J.K. Rowling billboards is not because of the statements themselves, but rather the social context. Trans women are trans females, so are included by that definition, and very few white people would have batted an eye at a I Heart J.K. Rowling poster prior her anti-trans spree. It's only once we acknowledge the context of what's going on that the message becomes clear. Transphobes exist, they have money and power, and they are not about to leave us alone. It's effectively a bigot's way of catcalling marginalised folk, reminding us of our place in society, that we only exist at their discretion, something that can be withdrawn at any time. Well, a similar thing is happening here regardless of intentions. Thanks to this clusterfuck, people no longer know if they can trust Jill Bearup, Tom Scott, or anyone else in their immediate vicinity. It effectively forces marginalised people to either open themselves up to potential violence in a place they once felt safe, or cut themselves off from certain areas of public life. And yes, media and art is an important part of life. I remember going through a similar thing regarding Natalie Wynn of ContraPoints after she stated that she could out a popular YouTuber she hangs out with for sexual harassment, but stated she wouldn't do that because of the public criticism said predator would face for it. As a survivor of sexual assault, I could no longer feel safe watching people like H-Bomber Guy or Philosophy Tube, since she could be referring to any of them, and that's not a risk I could afford to take. Well, the same principle is true here. The fact that Tom Scott thinks marginalised people should just get over it and act like nothing has happened since the posts were removed is a display of his privilege. It tells me that he has never been put in a situation where he has to remove himself from a part of public life out of fear of potential violence. And I say act like nothing has happened because that's exactly what Tom Scott is doing. In spite of confirming that Jill Bearup continues to hold a number of bigoted beliefs, Tom Scott continues to promote her, linking her channel both in the video's description and at the end of his video. This is where the main contention with Tom Scott rests, not with his initial collaboration, but the fact that Tom Scott is still sending people to Jill Bearup's channel, knowingly sending them towards her bigotry. Nobody is mad at Tom Scott for what he did in ignorance. We're disappointed with Tom Scott for what he's currently doing in full knowledge of the problem. Because the impact of all this is undeniable. Google Trends can give us a rough understanding, telling us the proportion of interest Jill Bearup's name has received in relation to her peak interest, a standard now set by December of 2021. Zooming in on that, we can also confirm that yes, this is a standard following the release of their collaboration with Tom Scott. Now that alone should be enough, but let's dig a little deeper. Jill Bearup's second highest month in regards to interest was February 2011, with 35% as much interest. However, Ms. Bearup's channel was only created in April of that year, so it's not like it helped grow what is now her largest platform. The highest rate of interest since she created her channel came in March of 2016 at 31%. So not even a third of the traffic Tom Scott gave her. And that's just search results. That's not including the direct link he gave her via the link in the description and at the end of his video. Yet, returning to a 90-day view, what I found really interesting is the fact that interest in Jill Bearup didn't peak until the 29th of December, 2 days after Tom Scott confirmed she was still a bigot, meaning that there had been time for him to stem the worst of the damage had he actually wanted to. Because when you promote a bigot in spite of their bigotry, that is a public declaration that said bigotry is acceptable, regardless of how much you might want to claim otherwise. Your actions in that situation speak far louder than any words. Yet that isn't even the worst part, because not only is Tom Scott continuing to promote Jill Bearup, but he seems to be doing everything he can to ensure as few people as possible, including trans people, are made aware of the danger she poses. Because yes, whilst Tom Scott promised to include a link to his statement in the video's description, that is literally all he did. He doesn't give any trans person watching his video reason to click the link and consider things for themselves. In fact, the only thing he does say that has any sort of relevance to his article is the statement that, quote, revenue from this video and more has been donated to the Trevor Project and Childline, end quote. I also checked the community tabs on both Tom Scott's channels as well as his Twitter, and there was absolutely nothing there to alert people to the issue. As of the 31st of January 2020, there still isn't. In fact, the only reason I even found out about Tom Scott's statement is because another trans person sent it to me, showing us once again that it's left up to trans people to pick up the pieces. That's why getting the video on Jill Bearup out there, as unpolished as it was compared to this one, was so important. And it's not like it's some super difficult problem to solve, just add some sort of description or mention of Jill Bearup's history of transphobia alongside the link, preferably at the very top of the description so it's the first thing trans people see. Hell, even qualifying it as claims of transphobia would have been better than what Tom Scott's currently doing. Not by a lot, and that's absolutely trivialization, but it will at least give trans people some semblance of choice in the matter. Though it's not just a lack of transparency surrounding the link, there's also the issue of the title of the statement. It's not addressing Jill Bearup's history of transphobia or something similar. Tom Scott titled his statement, Fight Scene Video. And that's it. So even if you're a trans person checking out his website or you're someone subscribed to his newsletter, there is nothing there to alert you to the fact that the person he's promoting could be a danger to you. And that is not only dangerous, but downright insulting. Because Tom Scott, someone whose entire persona centers on the idea that he's making information accessible, seems to be doing an awful lot to make sure that as few trans people as possible read his statement and make up their own mind. Something that makes me think that, at least on some level, Tom Scott knows his response is inadequate. If Tom Scott actually felt that what he was doing was enough, he'd trust in trans people's decisions and wouldn't be hiding his statement away like this. And Tom Scott has at least a rudimentary understanding of the problem I'm getting at. Now, how can I say that? Well, we just have to return to his justification for working with Jill Bearup in the first place. Quote, "First up, I had no idea about this during production. I know Jill because I've made stuff for the network she was part of, Standard. It's a diverse network that includes several major trans YouTube creators and a lot of their allies. So something like old transphobic post was far, far outside my expectations. I took her membership there as a this person's all clear signal and didn't make any further searches before suggesting the video idea." End quote. Again, nobody is actually angry that he collaborated with Jill Bearup whilst ignorant to her past actions. But the principle that her presence on Standard marked her as someone who is safe to work with is the very same standard that many people will apply to him and his channel. People, both trans and cis, are going to assume that Jill Bearup is safe, not in spite of Tom Scott, but because of Tom Scott. He has made himself an active part of the very problem he describes in his statement, doing absolutely nothing to break the chain. Something else that's worth noting is the fact that Tom Scott has effectively tried to paint Jill Bearup's transphobia as a victimless crime. How? Well, the only two times he mentions trans people are when he's talking about the trans people working at Standard and when he asserts he's an ally to trans people towards the end. That's all. No mention of the sort of impact Bearup's bigotry has had and on who. The most he ever talks about is the abstract idea of transphobia, making it much easier for cis people to dismiss as a non-issue. On top of this, Tom Scott never addresses the fact that transphobia was only a part of the issue here, that there were far more people harmed through her actions. Now, I know some people might want to assert that this is the result of Tom Scott simply not knowing about everything else. But seeing as he was alerted to one form of bigotry, something that should have sparked immediate investigation, it's less that he didn't know, and more that he didn't want to know. While some of it does require extra context, a lot of the stuff I discussed in my video, including the demand to strip adult autistic women of their autonomy, was surface level. It didn't require a deep dive, which tells me all I need to know about how little time Tom Scott actually spent looking at the issue. Yet it's not just Tom Scott's failure to take the proper action when he was made aware of the problem that has resulted in some form of harm towards the trans and other communities. It's also the way his statement constantly trivialises the issues and concerns raised by trans folk. Take, for example, the following statements. Quote, which seems like an enormous overreaction to posts that were deleted years ago. End quote. Quote, it would also ignite an inevitable firestorm of unhelpful arguments, expose a large amount of people to long-deleted transphobia, and establish an impossible precedent about vetting the entire history of everyone I work with in the future. End quote. Quote, same firestorm or worse, same unhelpful arguments that go nowhere, same exposure to long-deleted transphobia, same precedent. End quote. Quote, I'm being vague because trying to summarize would be inaccurate and unfair, and would also spark unhelpful, endless debate. End quote. Overreaction, unhelpful argument, unhelpful, endless debate. This is how Tom Scott has chosen to present the hurt he caused trans people and the entirely predictable criticism he received. All of this is simply him painting those of us who would criticize him for his actions or call upon him to do something more substantial as overreacting, hypersensitive trans people. The same is true with his repeated mention of the age of the posts and the fact that they've been removed, as if members of the trans community aren't keenly aware of these facts and are responding in light of them. It's the same old shit marginalised folk are sadly all too familiar with, where us talking about issues that impact our daily lives are minimised and cast as drama, with us being presented as making a mountain out of a molehill or beating a dead horse. At its core, all of this is presented under the assumption that he, a cis guy, has some sort of right to decide what is and isn't an appropriate reaction to transphobia, regardless of when it took place. Which he doesn't. And that sense of entitlement, the need to centre cis feelings on transphobia, that continues to be seen in other sections like this one. Quote, my read on the situation was that Jill had once been in sight of a radicalisation hole, but thankfully now had a wider circle of friends and had come to the reasonable decision that quiet deletion of old posts was the best idea. End quote. Saying Jill Bearup came to the reasonable decision that quiet deletion of old posts was the best idea is not a neutral statement due to the inclusion of the qualifier reasonable, without which the sentence still works. Keeping in mind that this is found towards the very start of his post, this is clearly Tom Scott priming his readers with the conclusion that the issue had been resolved in a reasonable fashion. Ergo, the criticism he's now receiving is unreasonable. Only problem is, it hadn't been resolved. I mean, if I was drunk driving and ran into someone by accident, only to just drive off, that wouldn't resolve things. That'd actually make things worse even though it had been an accident. So why then, considering the fact that Jill Bearup spent years targeting trans people and other marginalised groups, reinforcing narratives that have been used to strip away our rights, does Tom Scott consider quietly removing said posts to be reasonable? It simply isn't. The reasonable thing to do in Jill Bearup's case would be to spend whatever time she has countering the very same misinformation she helped propagate. It would be trying to undo the harm she caused, not simply hiding the bodies under the rug and hoping nobody will notice them as her career continued to take off. Because yes, there is a body count attached to the narratives Jill Bearup helped promote, not to forget an unquantifiable amount of suffering through the denial of healthcare, the increasing hate crimes, and the general sense of dread that currently hangs over the UK trans community. And I appreciate the fact that she's not the only person responsible. Normalization is never the result of a single person. But she's still someone who co-signed all of this, and that deserves scrutiny. Because as much as some people might like to debate how much is reasonable to expect from Jill Bearup, that is pointless, considering the fact that she hasn't even issued an apology, not so much as a my bad. And yet, Tom Scott still acts as if trans people are being unreasonable in believing she still holds certain views, when she's done nothing to show us otherwise.
Quote, however, if someone's default assumption is that deletion is a bad faith cover-up rather than a disavowal, then I can see why this would seem to be the only acceptable option. End quote.
When there's no effort to put right the wrong, then yes, that is a bad faith cover-up by very definition. If she actually disavowed what she said, she'd disavow it. She'd make it clear that she no longer holds these beliefs and that she's sorry for ever having done so. Because the sad thing is, bigots hide their bigotry all the time. The spike in hate crimes I detailed in my first video wasn't the result of people becoming more transphobic, it was the result of transphobic violence being normalized through the narratives pushed by people like Jill Bearup, leading the already transphobic to feel secure in lashing out at us. The fact that she's gone back to hiding things as her career took off doesn't mean anything outside of the fact that she's a shrewd capitalist. I mean, even by Tom Scott's own admission, Jill Bearup still holds at least some of her bigoted views. So aside from being a passive-aggressive little shit, throwing shade at a marginalized group for voicing their hurt at his actions, I have to wonder, what exactly was Tom Scott trying to do here? Who cares about people's default assumptions when all he has done is proven them right? Trans folk were right to distrust Jill Bearup, and they are right to be disappointed in him. And yet, Tom Scott still thinks he has some basis to claim like he's listening to us and he supports us, asserting his allyship towards the end of his statement, when the moment we criticize him, this is how we are presented, as unreasonable people demanding an impossible precedent, all because people try to let Tom Scott know about Bearup's history of bigotry, which he then chose to ignore. Yet what's really confusing is the way in which Tom Scott later pivots, making out that he could have avoided the collaboration altogether, in spite of that not being where the problem rests.
Quote, and I'll make sure to do due diligence in future, even for folks who are seemingly vouched for or folks I know well. This should have been identified and resolved even before production began. To be clear, that doesn't mean I'm only going to be working with people who are absolutely squeaky clean. That's an impossible standard to hold. At some point, I probably will end up working again with someone who's said or done questionable things in the past. But I will try to draw my own line of what's acceptable a little bit higher. End quote.
Again, and for the last time, nobody was angry at him for what he did in ignorance. We're disappointed at what he did after he was made aware. I also hate the dichotomy Tom Scott has drawn here, where not promoting transphobia, homophobia, ableism, anti-Semitism, and the sexualization of minors is equated with being squeaky clean, as if the trans people criticizing Tom Scott are just naive idealists. It really isn't that hard not to promote the narratives she did. Yet perhaps more importantly, I really question the sincerity of his statements, since if he knows he can raise the bar, why go out of the way to trivialize and even outright antagonize his trans critics? I mean, just listen to this quote and tell me that it doesn't smell a bit funny to you.
Quote, no doubt including people who haven't got the full context and are reacting based on several version deep retellings, and people who hadn't heard about it until reading this and are upset at finding out that my views don't align with theirs. End quote.
This is not how you write a statement addressing your failure to act properly. This is Tom Scott choosing to focus on the handful of people who might be criticizing him in bad faith over the countless trans people criticizing him in good faith. Again, he never gives an actual account of Jill Bearup's actions, meaning he's not exactly helping people understand. He's not putting out the fire, he's chucking on petrol. He has complete control over what he talks about. He is the one setting the tone here. This is him greenlighting his followers to discount any experience critical of him as just one of those ignorant people Tom Scott was on about. It's also part of the larger problem of cultural gaslighting in how marginalized people are constantly told not to trust their own experiences. This also ties back to earlier in how Tom Scott proclaims that Jill Bearup doesn't hold all the views that people are ascribing to her, without specifying which views he's on about and why. And whilst Tom Scott never talks about the harm Jill Bearup caused trans people and other communities, he has plenty of time to remind people of the facts that he knew his reputation would take a hit when he published his video with no further action.
Quote, except that the posts have been deleted and that years-old deleted posts are not enough to justify action when it's seen from context that those posts don't reflect Jill's views anymore, and accepts that I'm going to take a hit to my reputation from people who disagree. End quote.
Well, yeah, that's what happens when you decide not to act after being warned that you're promoting a bigot who has made no effort to fix the damage she caused to multiple marginalized groups. And noting the fact that you knew what those consequences were before you decided not to act isn't a flex, and it isn't confirmation that there was no way to do the right thing. It's confirmation that you don't give a shit. I mean, this is not the first time this has happened. In July of 2021, the Tumblr blog Bikini Armor Battle Damage posted a glowing review of Jill Bearup's work, leading others to warn them about what she's done. They not only apologised for that post, but they explained how they hadn't really kept up with her stuff shortly before she went public with her transphobia in 2017, so when they came back, well, they didn't know. And that's absolutely fair. Trans people don't expect cis people to keep track of everything. But what's really interesting is the fact that they address her actions directly, not only linking her post, but following it with a statement that,
quote, as anyone who follows the issue even casually knows, this is, to put it politely, bullshit propaganda that transphobes of all sorts use to encourage harassment and violence against trans people. It is deplorable for an influencer to use one of their platforms to spread this kind of hateful nonsense. It appears that Jill took the offending post down sometime in 2019, but we have been unable to find any evidence why she did that, or that she ever apologised, or what her current views may be. She doesn't seem to have approached the topic in any way, shape or form on her YouTube channel, her primary platform, or elaborated further beyond the one post that got a little over 200 notes. She also doesn't seem to have done anything to help trans people or promote trans acceptance either. End quote.
Notice the complete absence of sugarcoating, the way they center Bearup's victims, and how they even go so far as to note her complete absence of apology. And you know what happened? They were thanked by the trans community for doing the right thing. The only people who were upset were the bigots who supported what Bearup had promoted in the first place, and honestly, fuck 'em. Who gives a damn about making a few bigots upset? Well, Tom Scott does, at least according to a statement which says the following.
Quote, and to make it worse, there are countless different actions I could take and things I could say, each of which would upset different sets of people because they think I should have said or done something more, less, or different. End quote.
Okay, except that argument only works if we're operating under the false assumption that all views are equal. That's to say that bigots being upset that one of their kind is no longer being promoted is equally as bad as trans and other marginalized folk being hurt through said promotion. That's simply not the case. When marginalized people are telling you to stop doing something because it hurts them, and yet those targeting said marginalized people are telling you to not give in, you listen to the marginalized people. I thought that would be a basic concept that Tom Scott would be able to understand, but I guess I overestimated him. These are not the words of someone who has listened, and it's certainly not an apology like some people have told me. I mean, the only time Tom Scott says sorry throughout his entire statement is about halfway through when he states,
quote, And for some people, picking option C will be enough of a single bad call for them to stop following my own stuff. If that's you, I'm sorry." End quote.
Which, considering the rest of said statement, reads more, "I'm sorry that you took offense," than "I'm genuinely sorry." They're the words of someone unhappy with the fact that they're being scrutinized for their actions, a tune so tragically familiar that marginalized folk everywhere could dance in perfect step to its rhythm. So with that said, I guess it's finally time to talk about the very simple way Tom Scott could have avoided this entire thing. And that is, put the video on hold. You see, whilst Tom Scott acts like his only choices were to delete the video immediately with the little knowledge he had at the time, publish it with a statement, publish it without a statement, or talk to Jill Bearup, the fact is, they're not his only options, and they're certainly not his best. I appreciate the fact that he'd already produced the video and was probably very excited to post it, something that made the prospect of deleting it on what little information he had seem like an overreaction in his mind. But the fact is, he had full control over that situation. He had no deadline. It's on his secondary channel and he clearly isn't relying on that money to survive. So if Tom Scott had wanted, he could have put the video on hold, approached a trans person about the matter, and ensured that he had a full understanding of the situation before making a call. Hell, Tom Scott is in a position most people on YouTube would give their right arm for. He's made it as a YouTuber. He can afford to jet off to different places around the world and meet with specialists. The idea of him paying a trans person to carry out research and provide him with a consultation is not as outlandish as you might first think. Said trans person could have done a deep dive into Jill Bearup, interviewed some other trans folk, looked into earlier cases, and given Tom Scott a better understanding of the situation on the ground. Because the information covered in my first video was not difficult to find. Funnily enough, I actually had someone come along and tell me that it was unfair for me to judge Tom Scott since, without my video, there was apparently no way for him to have known what I talked about. Except that's patently false, seeing as I was able to produce the video. I am not a Jill Bearup expert. Hell, I'm not someone who is particularly familiar with the Hyde Park incident, which was the main focus of her article and subsequently plays a large role in my video in providing key context. In fact, if you've been with me long enough, you might have realized that I never covered what happened in Hyde Park. And the main reason for that is pretty simple. September of 2017 was the month in which I moved to India. I was kind of busy. That's actually why I spent so long at the start of my last video going over it, because it was central to Ms. Bearup's arguments and I didn't have an earlier video to reference like I did with a lot of the stuff mentioned in said video. Point is, any trans person could have done what I did, and only then would Tom Scott have to even consider deleting that video. Which, to be clear, I do believe he should have done, but at least now he would have understood the depth of the bigotry Jill Bearup promoted. Because I find it kinda messed up how Tom Scott fought to ask Jill Bearup about said transphobia, the very person who has every reason to lie, but he never once thinks to ask trans people. The people on the receiving end. Not once. Though to be fair, that's not just a Tom Scott thing. Cis people only respecting the opinions of other cis people and seeking them out is a systemic problem. It's why it's almost impossible to be heard as a trans person at times. And yet, Tom Scott had the opportunity to show us that he was better than mainstream media. What's more is, deleting the original video didn't have to be where everything ended. During this entire thing, I kept thinking back to a video Tom Scott had published in 2019, titled, "Why You Can't Trust Me." In the video, Tom Scott travelled to the South Australian mining town of Coober Pedy, where he planned to do a story on how the town sources water. Only when he got there, it turned out that things were a lot more complicated than he'd originally thought. However, not want to waste an opportunity, Tom Scott turned lemons into lemonade. He made an incredible video explaining his whole creative process and discussing how it can be difficult for him to resolve contradictions. And there was a similar opportunity here if Tom Scott had wanted it. To be absolutely clear, I don't expect Tom Scott to create takedown videos, but detailing what Jill Bearup had said before going over why he pulled the plug, that could have served as a vital example for other creators out there. Even better yet, Tom Scott could have introduced the topic before allowing a trans person on as a guest spot to explain why the UK trans community is currently on red alert. Because, no offence to the people of Coober Pedy, but it's a town with a population of around 1,700 people, and Tom Scott was worried about causing strife for a couple of the people he interviewed who had conflicting accounts. Meanwhile, 3,000 trans people, users of a single service, were stripped of medications overnight in 2020, all on the assumption that cis girls are being pressured into thinking they're trans, a narrative Jill Bearup helped promote. We also have to keep in mind the other 200,000 to 500,000 trans people living in the UK, people who are currently on red alert, a fact Tom Scott could have drawn attention to. A video like that would have meant the entire thing hadn't been a waste. That video could have been monetized with the money going to Childline and the Trevor Project instead of the original, and Tom Scott could have been the exception to what every trans person has come to expect from cis people. Tom Scott could have chosen to make himself part of the solution with an incredibly simple action, but instead chose to make himself part of the problem. A problem which, just the other week, had the UK reprimanded for its, quote, extensive and often virulent attacks on the rights of LGBTI people that have been occurring for several years, end quote, being listed alongside Hungary, Poland, and the Russian Federation. That's how bad things are right now, and we need cis people to start putting in the effort, especially if they want to walk around claiming to be allies. Instead, all we get are people like Tom Scott acting as if we're angry at him for what he didn't know, rather than what he did once he knew, trivializing and antagonizing us, and glossing over the very simple way he could have avoided this whole ordeal. This entire thing has been nothing but one big disappointment, a reminder that even if you think someone is an ally, there's still a very good chance that they'll prove you otherwise. If you appreciate what we do here and like to help out, please consider becoming one of our wonderful patrons who make all this possible. On that note, we'd just like to thank the following people: Matthew Kovac, Hannah Banghart, Gerrit Van Voorst, Cthulhu, Higgins the Seagull, and Flynn. And for myself, Adita and Levi, take care now.